It's my great pleasure to join you for this dialogue, which is really looking at something that has already begun, and yet we have not begun to understand quite how transformative much of what we refer to perhaps as digital finance or fintech will be in the years to come. And I have the great pleasure to address you this morning in my capacity as co-chair, together with Maria Ramos, who until February of this year was the CEO of Absa Bank in South Africa, as co-chairs of the Task Force on Digital Financing of the Sustainable Development Goals. The Secretary General established this task force with a very specific mandate to help him and help the United Nations better understand how this unfolding frontier and the multiple platforms of digital finance will intersect with the Sustainable Development Goals through essentially the medium of finance. So it is in this triangle that the work of the task force is located, and very much a task force that is not meant to write up what is happening today, but rather try to understand, anticipate, or at least outline a range of possibilities of what is likely to emerge over the next few years. And to those of you who think that this may still be futuristic thinking, let us just remind ourselves how many of us today already in this room, in our daily lives, are working off digital platforms for our personal financial management. And I'm very pleased that Patrick Njoroge is here, Central Bank Governor of Kenya. He can speak to this phenomenon, not being one that is traditionally associated with countries, as you put it just now, John, at the front line perhaps of technology development. But in many developing countries, the technology platforms now become means by which economies can actually become frontier appliers of that technology, sometimes faster than the countries and the economies in the industries in which they're developed. And I think as Central Bank Governor of the Kenyan Central Bank, Patrick Njoroge will speak to a number of the developments that I think are today truly at the cutting edge of digital finance in the domain, for instance, of inclusive finance. But let's move beyond that. Blockchain, many of the financial insurance institutions, capital market actors that are today looking at fintech are beginning to discover it as not only something that enables them to operate more effectively, but to perhaps touch on a capability to interpret and understand risks in ways that were unimaginable even until perhaps a year or two ago. Take the ratings agencies. The ratings agencies are phenomenally powerful signal providers to the financial markets, to investors, about where it is that we should anticipate risk, where volatility is, how investment decisions should be informed. With today's satellite technology, with the imagery, with the ability to understand how climate risks will play out, we suddenly have the possibility to inform and advise investors on bonds that they may invest in ways that simply were not possible before. So the whole information and risk database upon which the intermediaries in the financial system, but also at the end of the day, the investor, the consumer, the client will be able to make decisions, will fundamentally shift. And these are just a couple of examples, and the task force is really trying to understand in what direction will that future take us, what should we anticipate as the possibilities and opportunities, but also, and this brings us back to the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, how do we also understand the risks that may be implied in this? It is not surprising that in the United Nations, coming together as nation states, governments are looking at the governance of this space, not just from the point of view of, for example, what the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors just discussed last Saturday, which is the inherent risks perhaps in cryptocurrencies and what this implies for the stability of the financial system. But the fundamental rights in terms of data protection, of privacy, also what are some of the inherent risks that many of you may already have heard about. Insurance companies may be able to target and design more bespoke insurance products for specific groups of clients, but they may also inadvertently or deliberately exclude in future entire groups from insurance because they simply don't pay in the business of insurance. And these are just some of the examples that inform our current debate, and I'm sure throughout this week you will hear many more. Our object and our objective that the Secretary General has set us is to, in particular, explore how against the spectrum of enormous economic transitions in terms of technologies, in terms of some of the goals and the indicators that the 2030 agenda has set us, which will require a deployment, a more rapid and more focused, but also a deployment on a scale that is often unprecedented of finance. How will this particular intersection between technology, the SDGs and finance inform and shape government policy making, but also the actions and the directions in which players in the market will invest? I'm pleased to say that both Patrick and to my right also the Central Bank Governor of Samoa, Ms. I just want to make sure I pronounce it correctly. I know it's Mayava, but Ainu Enari, yes. Are members of the task force. And this task force is deliberately composed of key players in the technology space, in the finance space, in the regulatory space. So we're also very pleased that we have central bank governors who are part of this task force. And if you're interested, more information is available also on the internet on the work that we're undertaking. The purpose of this is to locate the work in the broader context of what you are discussing this week here, the financing and for development process and discussion, and also enabling the Secretary General and the United Nations family to be a more informed advisor and partner to nations across the world as they move forward in addressing these issues. The work of the task force is scheduled to be completed by early 2020. An interim report will already be provided into the process leading up to the high-level event in September. And we very much look forward to engaging with as many of you as possible. The work of the task force is very focused, but also very committed to addressing the principles of inclusion and diversity. So just over the next 3 months, there will be consultations that will happen with the digital finance and regulatory community in Paris this week, in a few weeks in Singapore, and then in Nairobi, Kenya, in order to allow the task force to truly capture the diversity, but also the enormous pace of change that is occurring. I think with that, John, let me end my presentation for now and then happily contribute to questions and discussions of the panel. Thank you.